I'm representing the Virginia Tech students for concealed carry on campus.
Is it CAT?
CAT.
CAT, okay.
And our question is, a House bill that would have allowed valid permit holders to carry concealed firearms on Virginia's public campuses for self-defense never even got out of the committee this year. Delegate Sherwood and others said this is because you would have vetoed it and hence did want to put effort into it. However, you just signed a bill allowing attorneys to protect their lives with firearms without so much permit or training. Why does the House committee feel you would not support the concealed carry on campus bill when it's clear you know the value of firearms protecting lives?
Yeah. Well, Kat, let me just give you a little civics lesson. When a legislator says, well, gosh, I didn't push a bill because I didn't think the governor would sign it, you should be somewhat skeptical about it. Somewhat skeptical about it, because they pass bills all the time. I mean, they passed 900 bills this year, and I can assure you, if the votes were there in the legislature to pass that bill, they would have gotten it to my desk. In fact, the legislature passes bills. There are some issues on which they know I'm going to veto bills, and they pass them to get it to me to try to see if I will, do something politically unpopular and veto a bill. So I chuckle when I hear a legislator say, well, of course I wanted to do this, but gosh, the governor, he would have vetoed, so I just decided not to do it. The fact of the matter is there weren't the votes in the legislature to get that bill passed, even in committee. But rather than talk about the legislature, you're asking me a question, so let me tell you the way I look at this thing. I have said if that bill got to my desk, the first thing I would do would be I would sit down with the folks who run security on college campuses, and I would chat with them about the bill to see if they thought it advanced the cause of public safety on campuses. That is what I do on bills like this that deal with public safety. I sit down with the head of state police. I sit down with police chiefs and sheriffs. I would sit down with the head of campus police and say, well, what do you think about this? I've had conversations that are anecdotal, a couple here and a couple there, with campus police chiefs about this issue because I knew it would come up. And I have not had a campus police chief say anything to me other than, we think this would not help public safety on college campus. I recognize there are people who have different points of view on this, but the professionals that do campus security that I have talked to about this have uniformly told me that they thought it was a bad idea. But again, I have not said, I'm going to veto this bill. I have said if it comes to me, I'm going to talk to campus security folks and see what they think. The legislature, there just were not the votes in the legislature to get that passed, even in committee this year. Third, I proposed a bill, another bill in the aftermath of Virginia Tech, recommended by the Tech panel, was to make sure that background record checks are done at gun shows so that somebody who's a felon or mentally ill and dangerous or a domestic abuser under a protective order cannot walk into a gun show and walk out with guns. I just think it's fairly straightforward. If you want a felon to have a gun, that's one thing, but if you don't, or a domestic abuser or somebody who's mentally ill, you got to have a record check. That bill did not pass. That bill has been a perennial. It's been introduced a lot. Has not passed.
There's a reason why it doesn't pass.
Finally, I proposed a bill. Federal and state law already say it's illegal to purchase or even have a gun if you're a felon, if you're a domestic abuser on a protective order, if you're mentally ill and been adjudicated dangerous. That is the existing law. We have a very simple background records check that Virginia put in place that many other states have copied that enable folks to search the database and find out that information very promptly. Every licensed gun dealer in Virginia must do that search before selling a weapon. At gun shows, it's very common that some of the booths will be licensed gun dealers who have to do the record checks and others won't. And so, I don't understand, I really don't understand the argument, except there are some who think that any regulation or restriction on gun ownership is a bad thing. And again, there are some who believe that. But what I've said is, look, there's already a restriction. We've already passed laws that say mentally ill, dangerous, felons, domestic abusers shouldn't have guns. And so it's not a new law to say we're going to check and make sure that the existing law.
Yes, it is.
So I have a very difficult time understanding why people would take the position that in some of these gun shows are very large commercial operations. There's one in Richmond that was run in a place called the Show Place, a bit like a big convention center, where you just walk in and walk out with all kinds of weaponry that if in the wrong hands, law-abiding people are going to be able to purchase them. But if they're in the wrong hands, they can do a lot of damage. So I don't fully understand. I've got to admit I don't. Ma'am, Mrs. Brown, and then I'm going to come right here to